It is no secret that the internet has permanently changed the way you and I consume games. While the notion of buying a physical copy of a game still absolutely very much exists, more and more companies are going the way of only making their games available through digital downloads, and some companies are getting into business models where you can, with a good enough internet connection, stream a video game, removing the idea of ownership completely, and having the player pay a certain amount to rent a game. While the idea of offering video games as a service certainly appeals to the larger developers and publishers, how will that affect the gaming landscape for players? So we'll talk about the idea of playing in the game stream next on DLC. Hello everyone, welcome to DLC. I'm Brian and with me we have Nick.
What year is it?
And we have Ronnie once again.
One more over Ron. One more. Add it to the tally.
Add it to the tally. There is no Ron for this episode, so you'll pick up one on Ron, but you're still 70.
You're only still 70 behind.
Yeah, he'll be 73 behind, and you're 7 behind Nick. So
I'm catching up to Nick.
That is your next hurdle for second place. So Nick making his first appearance since the E3 episode last year. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a rocky 8 months, but I am back.
Back and better than ever, and so it's just the three of us. It is not the giant party that was for the Super Smash Brothers episode, so a little cozier, a little quieter. And
enjoying ourselves insulating from the massive freaking snowstorm.
Yes! Snowmageddon currently going on as we speak. So, 2 feet of snow on the way. Hooray. So, before we dive into talking about video games and streaming, just want to remind everyone out there that every single episode of downloadable content can be found on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play Music, as well as our website, dlcpodcast.com. Have a look at our upcoming recordings. Let us know if you want to be in an episode. Give us ideas for future episodes. You can also check us out Facebook and Twitter. Twitter at DL Content, Facebook at Downloadable Content. So it's all there. All there for your rapid consumption, dlcpodcast.com. So, let us dive in, gentlemen. We're going to be talking about streaming games, which is not, as some people might think, it is not a new idea. It's an idea that has been tried for almost 40 years.
Yes, sir.
This is for people who think that, things like PlayStation Now and Xbox Game Pass and things like that, GameFly, if we all remember that now. Things like, this is not a new idea. I mean, you have to go back further to things like the Sega Channel, which was my first introduction to video games as a streaming service. But then we have to go back even further than that. We have to go all the way back to 1980 to a console that we call the Intellivision, which is apparently getting revived.
Yeah, yes, that's
cashing in on nostalgia.
That's special.
Oh, that's definitely good.
On the other hand, unlike the other cash grab consoles that have been being done lately, this at least includes some of the original Intellivision people.
Yes.
It's not like when they were licensing the Coleco for Coleco Chameleon, where it's literally a different company that revived the name.
Yes. and what Polaroid is currently going through. But anyway, but I
You would know all about that, Mr. Photography Man.
Yes, I would. So we go all the way back, before we're talking about video games as a streaming service. So this is an idea where you do not own the game itself. You are streaming a game. You are renting the game digitally through your console. This isn't like going to Blockbuster, and I know I'm dating myself for that.
Well, the funny part is most of the older streaming systems don't do more of a the Netflix model, where you pay for the streaming service, and then you just play whatever games they're letting you play.
Right.
As opposed to nowadays, where you pay for that specific game.
Yep, it's based on game, or some do have a monthly subscription like PlayStation Now. But this was the early streaming services were done basically through a specialized adapter hooked up to your cable connection, and the first one of these, little history here, is called the Play Cable, which was introduced in 1980 for the Intellivision, and
then died 3 years later exclusively because of the video game crash of 1983.
Yep.
Which killed it and the entire industry.
And how it worked was that it was
and by the way, I was born in 1983. I'm not going to say that my birth caused the video game crash, but I can't say it didn't. I don't know that for certain.
So, the video game industry coming to a complete halt in 1983 was your fault then. Thanks!
Hey, it led to the rise of Nintendo, man.
It did.
Sometimes you gotta take the bullet.
Sometimes, and then I'll take all the credit for being born in 1985 for Nintendo. All right.
For the rise of Nintendo? So that means when they do the next Wii U, I can blame you? Why was there a Virtual Boy, Brian?
I had a moment of weakness. So the Play Cable and also the other early streaming services, you have some big bulky adapter that gets hooked up to your console, which is then connected to your good old standby coaxial cable.
With the Play Cable's humongous 8 kilobits of memory.
Oh yes,
8K of memory.
Kilobits, not kilobytes.
Remember, the original Mega Man 1 was, 1 megabit of memory?
Something like that. So, when it was officially launched in 1981, and there was a really, really concerted advertising for this. The commercials for it, I'm looking at Wikipedia, the baseball player Mickey Mantle appeared in commercials for the Play Cable.
Yup. Yes, sir, he did.
And the service was available in 13 cities to start, including Fayetteville, New York. Apparently the wiki has to go out of its way to say that. And it had a 3% subscription rate, which was still higher than the rate of Intellivision sales where Play Cable was not available. This was apparently where it was available. It was somewhat popular, but even before the industry crash, cable companies complained about the high cost of the computer that needed to run the service.
Yep. I was gonna say, if it wasn't for the crash, I wonder if Play Cable would have continued, and if maybe we would have seen a jump start in that model of video game service, because every time it starts, something happens that kills it before it can get too big.
It's like VR.
And we'll talk about that for a couple of them.
It's like
PlayCable was killed by the video game crash. GameLine, which we'll get to in a second, ended up getting killed by mismanagement, I believe.
Yeah.
The Satellaview ended up dying because of company drama between the companies.
Yeah, GameLine was another one. Moving to that was a dial-up game distribution service for the Atari
2600. Yep.
And dial-up. How do you imagine? You start the stream service like that. All right. Thank you for connecting.
Wait. Here's the best part for our audience here. GameLine became America Online. It became AOL.
I hope no one tried to call you while you were playing on GameLine.
the game company that did GameLine licensed their technology out, and then they went out of business. The company they licensed it to was doing a video game one, and then once the internet started to rise the way it was, they took their service and used that code and used it to create America Online. No
we
joke.
Went from video gaming to instant messenger. Awesome.
Yes.
You've got mail. I hope you don't have stock.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, it wasn't mismanagement. GameLine was killed by legal issues with the cable providers.
Yep, and this GameLine was developed and operated by a company called Control Video Corporation, and that company also went belly up in the 1983 crash.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm just looking at Wikipedia. It says that GameLine was originally envisioned not just to provide games, but also news, Newsline, stock quotes, Stockline, sports reporting, Sportline, email, Mailline, online banking.
Well, here's the thing. While I didn't put it in this because it didn't have streaming, a bunch of the systems were doing that kind of stuff. The Famicom had its own modem that you could look up stocks on and sports reporting, and you could buy lottery tickets on.
Yeah, the Famicom BS, I believe it was called, that was trying to use satellite internet connection to use that. I think it was Japan only, though.
Okay, you're getting two things mixed up. The BS was the Satellaview stuff, which was for the Super Nintendo.
Oh,
And
okay.
I'm talking about that. But the Famicom had its own one.
I knew the Famicom did have its own one because there was a few differences between like the regular Famicom and there was like some upgraded Famicom. I thought.
Yeah, it had its own, but it was a modem. It wasn't satellite. The first satellite one for Nintendo was the Satellaview, which was Super Nintendo. I mean, I'll look it up now, but
No, I believe you. It's just I'm trying to remember exactly how this.
yeah, the original, the Famicom one. Like I said, I would have it open. I was reading about it. I mean, I read about it before. I was reading about it earlier today, but since it didn't have games, I didn't keep it up because I didn't think we'd be talking about it.
But I'm reading this, and I immediately think of all of the different channels that was on the original Wii, like the news channel and the weather channel, and which is
The Famicom modem was used by the Minnesota State Lottery.
Yep.
wow. Technology. So it was funny because the way this worked was that, the users for GameLine would, for a fee, download games to their GameLine modules. The game would typically work for 5 to 10 plays, after which the user would have to connect to GameLine again and pay for another download.
Yep, to keep people... Well, because it's supposed to be the subscription thing, so they had to do something to limit...
So it's a glorified arcade machine?
Yes.
You're basically playing video games collect.
Here's the thing. Now, here's
1-800 call video games.
Here's the difference for PlayCable and GameLine, as opposed to what we'll get to with the Satellaview and Sega Channel. As far as I know, PlayCable and GameLine had no unique games. they had a subscription service that let you play other games that already existed without you having to buy them.
That's correct. Yep.
As we got farther along, when we hit the Teleview and Sega Channel, that's where you start having the issues we have dealt with, where you have games that were unique to those two systems, and that we do not have, at least not properly, right now, archived.
Yes. So,
which we'll get to.
yes, we will. And, Game Line, so you had that, and then, of course, that was a casualty of the crash.
Yep.
And then, we really wouldn't have anything, in this vein, in this idea. Really, I mean, yes, the Famicom had its modem and whatnot, but, like...
nothing that did streaming.
Nothing that did...
there were several modems between that, but...
Yes, but nothing that actually did streaming itself. The next major one would be, chronologically, would be Sega Channel.
Yes.
And which was my introduction to the whole idea of, wait, what, you can do what?
Wasn't that only available in certain markets, though?
The Sega Channel?
Yes.
See, here's the thing. I knew nothing of the Sega Channel at the time. Everything I know about the Sega Channel was much later.
Like, I knew that the Sega Channel... I mean, I guess it depended on the agreements that Sega had made with various cable providers.
Alright, because I have a coworker who used to live on Long Island. She was probably the only person, one of the few, on Long Island to actually get the Sega Channel service. You were probably the other one, Brian.
Yeah, there was one of my neighbors when I was living downstate as a kid. I'd go over his house and we'd be playing on the Sega Channel. And so I guess it was entirely dependent on what arrangements Sega had made with certain cable companies. Because once again, this is for the Sega Genesis. This was launched December 1994, so pretty near the end of the Sega Genesis life cycle. So
now, it worked with some of the other stuff as well, like the later stuff Sega did. Probably not the Dreamcast though.
I was gonna say, I'm actually pretty sure Sega Saturn went into its own thing. The Sega Channel itself was only Genesis.
It was only Genesis, and this was another one. It was an adapter that stuck into the cartridge slot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, coaxial cable, our old friend. You plug it in, and it was a monthly subscription. It was a
And Brian, you had this, right?
I never had this, but I went over. I had new friends who had it.
Okay. So, from what I understand, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It had a list of games that were regular Sega games, and then it had a couple games that didn't have North American releases, but were released elsewhere.
That is correct.
The one that I know of off the top of my head, and it was actually the first time I really became familiar with it, was watching stuff on the Wily Wars, Mega Man: The Wily Wars, which was an excellent Mega Man game that got a European release on cartridge, but never got a North American release. It was a Sega Channel exclusive.
That's what it says here. Yeah, also with Pulseman and Alien Soldier. Okay. So this was probably like the first time that they would offer exclusive games for having the service instead of trying to sell a cartridge.
Yeah,
and the way that the Sega Channel worked was that every 2 weeks an updated slate of the games that you could play changed. So obviously you always had a Sonic on there at all times, at least one.
Yeah.
And it broke it down into different genres. Like, okay, you take a look at this menu for fighting games, sports, platformers, what have you. But yeah, the Sega Channel introduced me to games that either never got a physical release in this country or were really not popular. Like, I was introduced to 2 games on the Sega Channel that have stuck with me. They're both fighting games. The first one is Clay Fighter.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other one was called Balls. Ballz.
Yeah. I'm familiar with both.
Balls, which only saw a release on the Mega Drive in Europe. So,
I believe both were on the Super Nintendo and did get cartridge releases on the SNES. I also recall Balls being absolutely awful.
Oh, it's a hilariously bad game, but when I was 11, I loved it because it tried so hard to be 90s.
Oh no, there was a cartridge version for the Genesis, for Clay Fighters at least.
Yes, Blue Suede Goo, and
goddamn Clay Fighters.
Oh,
sometimes I wonder what would have needed to happen to have made Clay Fighters actually break out as a success, because I feel like there were a lot of things there where it probably could have at the time.
Very possibly.
But that's neither here nor there.
But, it rolled out in the US, and part of the reason why this didn't last long, it lasted for about 4 years. It was discontinued in 1998. It was a $25 activation fee, and, one of the major criticisms was that it was too expensive. It averaged about $15 a month to your cable bill.
I also think, wasn't another criticism that it launched too late?
Yes, that was where...
Genesis was past Prime?
Absolutely, because again, this was released very close to the end of the Sega Genesis's life cycle. So, yeah, 97 was when it was discontinued in this country. So, yeah, it was, and we were already moving on to things like Sega Saturn, Sega CD, the PlayStation.
To correct you, at least what I have in front of me says it was discontinued in 98, July of 98.
The Sega Channel was, yes. I mean, the console itself.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was talking about I thought you were talking about the Sega Channel, and I'm like, no, I think it was later than that.
No, the Sega Channel, so the service discontinued 1998, but the console itself was discontinued in 97.
Okay. Sorry, brain fart. I lost track of the conversation.
That's okay. So how the Sega Channel worked is that the games, this was an actual download. You picked the game, and then you would wait a few minutes. You actually saw like a download bar on your TV screen, and because the game was being downloaded directly into the Genesis's extremely powerful and large 4 megabytes of RAM.
Damn.
State of the art.
State of the art. And because the game was stored in the RAM, when you powered the system off, it would, obviously it would wipe the memory, and you'd have to download it again next time you turned it on.
I wonder how long that took.
To download?
Yes.
Oh, it only took like maybe a minute or 2.
Oh, that's not too bad.
No, the download times were not long. It was a couple minutes usually at most.
Because I was about to say, because playing on that whopping 4 megabytes of memory.
Yeah, but there were games on there that I beat because I never owned. So like I remember beating like 1 or 2 of the Sega the Sonic games, and just because it updated every 2 weeks with a new slate of games. There was always something new to play, or if you had played a game and then it went out of the rotation, it wasn't usually too long before it would come back. It wasn't like games showed up on the Sega Channel once and then never again.
Right.
So at $15.
Wait, Brian, Did you ever own a Genesis? I thought you had a Sega Genesis as a kid.
I did, but not for a long time. I had a hand-me-down Genesis from somebody when I was in high school.
Oh.
So I did own Genesis, but well into the PlayStation era, when somebody was like, yeah, I don't need this anymore, you have it. Okay! But yes, I did own a Genesis for a little while. And then, Sega lost the console war, and all the Sega games that I knew and loved ended up on Nintendo. So,
talking about losing the console war and Nintendo also had a service.
They did. That was launched about a year or so after Sega Channel. So you were talking to me about, I'd never heard of this. You were talking to me about this a few days ago when we were doing the test recordings. The satellite service.
Yep, the Satellaview for the Super Famicom. It obviously never came over to America. Otherwise, we would all already know about it. But it was actually relatively popular in Japan. And unlike a lot of the other ones we're talking about, it actually had some unique games that you could get nowhere else. Which was a problem for people who would like to see what those games are like now. The basic setup for it, like all the rest of these, you have a giant box that you're connecting your Super Nintendo or your Super Famicom as it is onto. But it also has a cartridge, which has a I believe the place is called the Story of the Town That Has No Name. Oh, no, I'm sorry. The Story of the Town Whose Name Was Stolen, which is this little hub area where you can wander around with a character. You can choose male or female. And that's where you download the games, get messages from Nintendo, and go into the games and can check all of your information. But they also tie that into several of the games, in that in several of the games, you will take the avatar that you have from the Story of the Town Whose Name Was Stolen, and you put that avatar into the other games. The main ones that most people are aware of, and there were several others, are the ones that have the most information that we piece together the best, are the 4 Legend of Zelda games, called the BS Legend of Zelda games. BS for Broadcast Satellite.
Damn it. I was placing bets on bullshit, but whatever.
But yeah, they, like the rest of the ones we were talking about. So, unlike the other ones, this was based, obviously, Satellaview, off of satellite. So, Nintendo had a deal with Saint Geiga, which was a satellite music company. Trying out that satellite music 20 years before it became a thing.
Yep, precursor to satellite radio.
Yeah, satellite radio, absolutely. So they would take certain time periods and set that off for their video game broadcasts. And you would have to be set up for that broadcast, and you'd be able to play a specific game during that broadcast period. So let's say Monday is going to be the Legend of Zelda Day. So every Monday at 6 p.m., I'm just using an example here, you'd be able to play this Zelda one. And every Monday at 6 p.m., you'd have to come back to play another piece of it until you completed it. And then Tuesday would be a different game, and Wednesday would be a different game. But you'd have to play in those windows of time, which, as you can imagine, that's quite a bit more of a pain than, say, the Sega Channel was.
Yes, because the Sega Channel, you could just fire it up and away you go. With the Satellaview, you could only play during a certain period of time each day. When the satellite was aligned.
On the other hand, there were a couple benefits to the satellite. And the main one being, you actually had quality music. Because they literally, once you download the game, it didn't download the music. As you played the game, they would broadcast the music down from the satellite as you're playing, so you would be getting CD quality or better music. So, and it also meant that this was one of the first Nintendo games, at least from Nintendo itself, that had voice acting. All of the text in the Zelda games was spoken text.
Except for Link.
And
Except for Link.
Yes, he would be spoken text, he just has no text.
That's how you get around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, so that's how the whole system worked. But I've actually played some of these games. And the BS Legend of Zeldas are absolutely worth playing. A group, while I cannot say that I agree with the act of emulation, because I don't want Nintendo to hurt my family, but there is a group online who has taken information from old Satellaviews that still had pieces of the games on it and pieced together the different chapters to make complete games. And right now we have complete versions of all 4 of the Zelda games.
That is dedication right there.
It absolutely is. The only thing we are missing for 2 of the games is music, and that's because it was piped in through the satellite. But both of those 2, the music, because we have VHS tapes and we can hear what the music was, match up to a Japanese-only Zelda CD release they had over there. So the groups have taken that music and put it into the game. So there's no guarantee it's perfectly accurate to back then, but as far as they can tell, that is the correct soundtrack for it.
Damn.
Yeah.
And this lasted for 5 years.
Yes, it did. And it would have continued, except for a falling out between Nintendo and St. Geiga. Nintendo was reaching out to other companies to look into, like, the Sony deal that we all think about.
Yes.
Okay, yes. They had spoken to Microsoft and 2 other companies where they were thinking of doing different things with them. But St. Geiga considered that competition with what they were already doing with the satellite radio, and basically gave Nintendo an ultimatum of, if you're going to be reaching out to them for this stuff, then our relationship is over. And Nintendo washed its hands and walked away. If that didn't happen, I'm curious if we might have seen this continuing into the N64 era, and possibly later.
Maybe. I'm just looking at some of the numbers here. So the Satellaview,
2 million units sold.
2 million units sold. Subscriptions peaked at around 116,000, and each unit costs between 140 and 180 bucks. So
I was gonna say, that's not chump change.
No, it isn't.
Like that. Let's say the Satellaview was a success, especially when you consider this. It's 2 million units sold, only in Japan. Imagine if that had been brought over here. I'm not saying it would have been a success over here the way it was over there, but when you consider those are only Japanese numbers, that's a lot.
That's pretty good.
That is really, really good.
Yes.
Go on.
I was going to say, do you guys want me to give you a slight rundown on the Zelda games before we go on?
I mean, I know quite a bit about the BS Zeldas. I don't know a whole lot of them, other than they're playable via the internet because we have too much time on our hands. Thank you, internet.
I guess I meant more, should I mention any of the stuff for our viewers?
Ow.
This is a podcast.
Yeah, that might be kind of, sort of, slightly important.
Okay, I won't spend too much time on it, but you had 4 games. You have the BS Zelda, which had a first and second quest. The BS Legend of Zelda itself, that's its name, was a remake of the original NES Legend of Zelda with improved graphics and using the Avatar character from the town whose name was stolen. So think kind of like Mario All-Stars, where it's an updated graphic set, but it's pretty close to the same game. It is the first time you get to play a female character, since you can choose male or female gender for your avatar. Link will eat your heart out. And it had several updated graphics, including an ocarina rather than a recorder for your character. It had a unique set of dungeon layouts, so all the dungeons were different than the originals, but the overworld was the same with a slight tweak. See, because of how short the time period was of playing the games, you had 50 minutes to complete 2 dungeons each week. So they made the overworld half the size. The overworld was 8 by 8 rather than 16 by 8. Basically, they kept all of the important screens pretty much the same, but pretty much all of the filler screens either got cut or combined. Which is a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, well, when you only have a limited window to play in, that makes total sense.
Yeah. It had one extremely positive thing that I love, and that was item scrolling with the L and R buttons. No need to go to the screen, just press L or R and you can switch your items. I think every fucking Legend of Zelda should have that. One of the last things I'll bring up on this, it had events. All of these had events, but the others deal with them slightly differently. In this one, randomly throughout the thing, you'll have the old man who gives you the sword saying something to the effect of, "Ganon's strength has become greater, your enemies have more life!" And then your enemies will take multiple hits. Or, the power is within you and all of the things will happen, and then you will never run out of bombs, or you will kill enemies in one hit. These are linked to specific time periods, so everybody would have that effect at the same time. So let's say at 3:32 to 3:34, you have unlimited bombs.
Interesting that they were able to have such sort of like an intricate schedule on a satellite program. And just looking at the examples that we have mentioned so far as far as streaming services, like, there was very clearly a market for this.
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
This wasn't just some, let's try it, if it doesn't work, fine. Just there were people really wanting in on this. If you could afford the subscription fee or the outlay of the unit itself, it would really save you on buying a game outright. I mean, that's still the appeal of streaming services even now. It's like, why plunk down $60 for a game when, for 15 or $20 per month, I could do this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether cost positives and negatives aside, there was legitimate demand for this. And
absolutely.
The Sega Channel died because it came out very, very late in the Genesis life cycle. Because I can't really imagine, because I'm looking at how much the Sega Channel cost, $15 a month. I'm like, that's not really a major expense today. But then again,
before we progress, could I finish saying about the Zelda?
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm like, I think you're leading away, and I'm like, let me finish at least.
Go on.
It's the one thing I made notes on.
I made this thesis, I'm gonna finish it, damn it!
And so that was the Legend of Zelda 3rd and 4th quest. The other 2 games, you had the Legend of Zelda Link to the Past. Literally, it's Link to the Past. Nothing to say there. Great game, but they didn't change it. The final one, which is the most interesting, but I will keep it short, was Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets, which was a legitimate sequel to Link to the Past. It had its own story. It used the Link to the Past overworld for the most part with some changes, but it actually played differently. And for the first time, you get to see the King of Hyrule on his throne. Zelda's there, the king is there, the world is not corrupted. This was its own game. Like the other one, you're playing an original character who was brought in from the town that lost its name somehow. But this also actually brought stuff in that was used later. They experimented with the rental shop in this, where you can rent the shovel or the level 3 sword, which would later get used 20-ish years later in Link Between Worlds. It used its timed events instead of like the other ones where it would give you some kind of bonus or downside. Instead, you would have things like you'd need to rescue someone. And if you did, you might get a piece of heart, or they'd be there to give you information later. But you'd only have the best one I can remember, because I remember actually playing this one, was the old man drowning. And you have like 5 minutes from where he falls into the place and starts drowning to save him. And you'll only hear his voice if you're in a nearby area. And that's the way all of these were. And it was the predecessor to the events in Majora's Mask. So a lot of this stuff came in the franchise later on.
For the major releases, yeah.
Yeah. I'm done. You may continue now.
I may continue.
My thesis is complete.
Excellent, excellent. Nicely done. So, you had these major ones, and then they sort of, I guess, disappeared for a while. I mean, because we've talked about, like, the Satellaview, that was Japan only. The Play Cable and Game Line, those were very limited releases.
And by the way, the whole reason the Satellaview was Japan only, from what I understand, was because it was an agreement between Nintendo and St. Geiga, and St. Geiga didn't have an existing network in America.
Fair enough.
They were a Japan-exclusive company, so that would be what led to that.
So, all of these things we've discussed so far, ancient history to some of our listeners,
what isn't ancient history?
That all these things, while they were popular in their own limited releases, were exactly that. They were not I think of the ones we've mentioned so far, Sega Channel had, probably the widest release, at least, obviously in this country, the biggest recognition. Sega.
Right. I was gonna say Sega Channel had the biggest one, but I think the Satellaview was the most successful, because I don't think Sega Channel sold as many, did it?
I genuinely don't know.
Okay.
I do not know.
Research!
I do not know the overall figures for...
Well, you said you had the Nintendo...
Oh, wait a minute.
Stuff up there, right?
Oh, wait a minute. Sega Channel, at its peak, the Sega Channel had over 250,000 subscribers.
Which is nowhere even close to 2 million in Japan.
So, yeah. Well, that was 2 million units sold. At any one point, the Satellaview had
less individual ones. I was looking at units sold, because I don't think Sega Channel hit 2 million units, but I could be wrong.
Yeah,
but I think Sega Channel was more active during its period.
Yeah, I do not know how many Sega Channel adapters, how many units had been sold. I just know that it had over 250,000 subscribers at its peak.
Yeah.
So, and also, fun fact, during the decline of the Sega Channel, Sega was looking at options to bring the Sega Channel service to PCs, but That didn't happen.
That would have been a game changer.
That absolutely. But instead, Valve came in and stole everything.
I was going to say, it's amazing the what-if scenarios of history.
Yeah. Like,
we're so... I mean, everybody thinks what if the PlayStation had been released as a Super Nintendo adapter that we all know about. But there's a lot more scenarios that were so close to happening.
But through whatever business backroom dealing happened, didn't. So there you go. So how long have we gone on this first half? We've gone about 45 minutes. And so, after the Sega Channel went belly up, we didn't really have any sort of major streaming services. We started to have, the idea of digital distribution, although did start to come into play, a decade or so ago, when you had things like, PlayStation Network, Virtual Console, but those weren't necessarily streaming services. Those were the first major sort of console stores.
Digital distribution.
Yeah, digital distribution. And these were not streaming services, but I think that the advent of the online store in consoles was sort of born out of this idea of streaming, because you were not getting hard copies of your games on a streaming service. So I think that the idea of the online store was sort of a branch off.
Yeah, because while I do see the popularity of these streaming services and being able to just be able to download and play at any time, there were still many other more people that just prefer that physical copy in their hand.
Oh yes, absolutely. And that's still true today. There's still plenty of gamers out there who prefer physical copies to digital distribution. But now we're living in an age where some developers are only releasing their games digitally. They're not putting out hard copies. Right. So
especially when you're talking about the indies, it's very difficult for them to even get a physical release.
Absolutely. So, we wouldn't start getting streaming services, proper streaming services again until pretty recently. So
also, the current set of streaming services, some of them are streaming for a very different reason than the older ones, where they're streaming because your computer may not have enough performance to play the game.
Exactly. So there are reasons. The reasons have changed. So that is what we're going to get into in our second half, how streaming services have moved into the 21st century. So that is where our discussion is going to take us. So in the meantime, we will cut to break. You'll have a few minutes of music. And so you're listening to Ronnie, Nick, and myself blathering on in episode 2 of season 9, talking about streaming video games. We'll be back. Welcome back to DLC, talking about streaming video games. We're all still here. We have not broken out our old Sega Genesis and are figuring out how to hijack the cable so that we can get this running again. Provided someone out there has, like, some sort of ancient, crusty server that can somehow do this. But moving right along to the modern era, as it were, as digital distribution becomes a major component of how we consume video games now, it was only natural that the idea of streaming video games, is back in the realm of discussion. Especially seeing that, at least for the major developers, we have mentioned it on DLC before, for major developers, this is sort of, for some of them, this is sort of like the end game, having a constant revenue stream, providing video games as a service rather than putting out copies, physical or digital, of a game. Instead of somebody buying the game once and then that's all the publisher or developer gets, by constantly paying money for the same game, we're printing money.
So kind of like what MMOs have been doing for years, except wider variety of games.
Yes, but without the massive upfront costs of developing an MMO.
Right.
Because MMOs are by far the most expensive genre of games to build.
Hence why we only get about 3 every generation.
Well, part of that's also the fact that the ones that the whole design thing of having to have a certain number of people to really create a game that is worthwhile to game with other people on means that there's only so many MMOs that the gaming public could support overall. And with 2 or 3 big ones that are always there, it means there's not a lot of extra people to go around to the smaller ones.
Yeah.
Because World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy exist.
Yeah, that. So, we mentioned at the end of the first half that, we have more and more digital distribution outlets, but, we're going into the current generation of consoles, and the game streaming services that have come back in, the idea of streaming has come back into the public consciousness, and thanks to the internet, we don't need to have a cable TV subscription anymore because more and more people are cord cutting. So you have services like PlayStation Now, which you need. I know you need it. It's obviously PS4. Is that available on PC as well? I thought it. Or
you could play a wide variety of exclusive PlayStation games from your PC or PlayStation 4.
So yeah.
On PC, all you need is a DualShock 4 controller with either a wireless adapter or USB mini cable, as well as a PlayStation Network account. So
yes.
Not a huge barrier, really.
No, and this PlayStation Now came into being. It was launched January 2014, so it's almost 5 years old at this point. And Sony recommends that players have a 5 megabytes per second internet connection to achieve good performance. So you need a pretty decent internet connection. You need broadband. Which,
yeah,
which isn't everywhere in the country at this point.
No,
but at the same time, it's not a high barrier to get over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just saying, like, that is one thing that all these new streaming services are dealing with, because even in places that have broadband, there are places that still have really, really crappy broadband.
How crappy does your broadband have to be to not achieve 5 Mbps?
I have cable internet right now, but if I used the DSL that's available in our area, I would get way below that.
That is amazing to me. Also very depressing.
We don't have great coverage here.
Capitalism.
Yes, and it's not worth it for them to roll out fiber optics out here, because Cape Cod is still considered a rural area, which is where I live for the people who are listening here. But there's hope in that the government put in a broadband system, a fiber optic system going down the whole entirety of Cape Cod, but they won't pay to bring it to individual houses. It goes to all the government buildings and schools. So each town has to figure out a way to pay to connect up into it. And my town still hasn't gotten off its ass.
Oh, Falmouth.
Yeah.
So, the way PlayStation Now works is obviously you need a pretty decent internet connection, and this is a monthly subscription. You have, it's either...
As of right now, it's got over 600 games.
It has over 600 games. It's $20 per month, or you can get 3 months for $45, and occasionally they offer yearly subscriptions as promotions.
Right now, the yearly subscription is going on and is $100.
$100 for the year, and you have access to over 600 games.
700.
Okay, so they've upped the total.
They having expanded their library, and I guess right now is also a 7-day free trial. Of course, that may not be applicable for when this episode goes up, but
We'll see. So, I'm just trying to remember. We talked about that one of the criticisms for the earlier streaming services was the cost, both in terms of setting up and maintaining the service, and for the end user, the monthly service, because it was usually tacked on as an additional fee to their cable bill.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was about $15 a month for a customer to have the Sega channel. Meanwhile, I'm looking at this, and it's they're going $20 a month, and I'm like, that kind of. I mean, I can obviously it's prohibitive to some people, but $20 a month doesn't sound incredibly egregious. But
unless you're Nintendo and you can get $20 for a year.
Yes. I was going.
And we'll be getting to them because they're up there too.
But I mean, you also have to look at how cheap digital distribution is nowadays, as opposed to back in the day when it was still a relatively foreign concept and technology, at least in America. Maybe not so much Japan, and it's also just a wider variety of content as opposed to the very small library games that you have with, say, the Sega Channel. Even if it updated, every 2 weeks, this is a full library every month.
And even though we have something like we have PlayStation Now, it still requires a bit of input, a bit of outlay for the customer, because as we mentioned, you need to have a pretty decent broadband connection, number one. And again, you need to be able to afford $20 a month. Yes, the library is pretty huge.
Well, you want to know what is a little better on both of those? Xbox's Game Pass.
Mm-hmm.
It is only $10 a month, so half the price right there. And while it only has 100 games at a time, it basically has every marquee title that Xbox has, including every Xbox exclusive.
Yep.
So, while it doesn't have quite as many games going back as PlayStation does, primarily because PlayStation has PS2 and PS3 games in it as well, which is awesome.
Yes.
If you are more into modern gaming, the Xbox Game Pass is probably a better choice for half the price and with all of the big games.
Right. But again,
which all the first-party ones, the Xbox exclusives, they say will be available on launch day.
Yes. And it is also much more widely available than PlayStation Now.
And that's about all the positive things you're going to hear me say about Xbox.
I mean,
I put in my good work for the year.
Yeah, there you go. You've done your good deed for the day.
For the next 11 months, you'll see the worst from here on.
From here on, it's nothing but withering scorn. For Xbox Game Pass, though, you do need to either have an Xbox One or Windows 10, specifically.
Well, considering they gave out Windows 10 for free for a long period of time.
Please use our product!
Basically.
Well, it's the issue they've always had, where every time they put out a new Windows, they fragment the base, because people are afraid of change. Not all change is good, trust me, there have been bad Windows, but whether it's good or bad, they have to fight people who won't change at all because they're comfortable with what they have.
Yep, no doubt.
So they have to make it as easy as possible.
Yes.
And there's not much easier you can get than free. Or there's not as much less expensive you can get than free.
Right.
They could pay you.
And also, for any of the games in Xbox Game Pass that requires that has online multiplayer, you must have an Xbox Live Gold subscription.
Does the PlayStation Now requires the PlayStation subscription too, doesn't it?
You just need an account. I don't think you need a Plus account, which costs money.
I'm looking at it right now. You do not need a Plus account. It has full access to multiplayer support. Okay. So that is better than Xbox in that way.
There you go. Now you can go back to shitting on Xbox.
There are a couple other ones that aren't associated with the big groups to bring up.
Yep. GeForce Now is one.
Yep, that's the one I was literally staring at.
All right, yep. Which I did not hear of GeForce Now until I was doing my research for this episode. I did not know about this.
Well, the fact
I know of it because I have a GeForce 980 Ti in my rig, so I see it all the time.
Yeah, the fact that it isn't a content provider means that it's flown under the radar a lot more. Because it doesn't sell you games. It basically sells you computer power to run the games.
How the hell does that work?
You go, I have this game, and then it's going to stream that game to you. But you're not buying the game from them.
So so wait a minute, you need to have the game first?
Yes.
Yes, so you have to purchase the game through a digital store, Steam, Uplay, Battle.net.
And you link that to GeForce Now.
Okay.
And then they go, these are the games we are compatible with. The ones that they have installed that they can send to you. And you go, let's say, I know one of them is Assassin's Creed Origins. So you go, I'm going to play Assassin's Creed Origins through this. And then they are going to stream that to you. Basically, it's not a distribution center. It's not like Steam. The whole point of this is, if you don't have a computer powerful enough to play these big games, they can do that for you. And you're literally just getting the video of it, and then your inputs are being sent to them.
Right.
Therefore,
but you still need a really fast internet connection, like 50 megabytes per second fast.
Wow. Yeah. So you need to have... So it sounds like, okay, you own a game, you know your computer is not powerful enough to run it, so rather than using your own computer's resources to run a game that it can't...
You use GeForce Now.
That's fascinating.
It also works with things, I believe, with like the NVIDIA Shield and whatnot, which is like their own like little mini console service.
Mm-hmm. Capcom is testing out a similar thing for the Switch in Japan with individual games. They recently did Resident Evil 7 last year, where it was literally just streaming it to your Switch. Your Switch is doing none of the processing. It's just taking the signal and then sending out the button presses.
That is interesting. So it's like it's like an interactive YouTube.
But if that works out, which we already know it works out, but we'll see if the companies find it worthwhile. But that could be a way to get games on the Switch that are not powerful enough for the Switch to traditionally handle, or to get games that graphically wouldn't be able to run normally on the Switch at their full resolutions.
Right.
Interesting. That is an interesting service. That's the recommended internet speed though for GeForce Now. Holy crap!
Yeah, it's it definitely is a power hog, no doubt about it. Which is why I don't think it is a widely used service.
You need fiber optics for that thing.
You need FiOS.
Yeah, you basically, if you have a kind of a okayish laptop and you're visiting, say, Houston, which has gigabit access, then yeah, that's a very ideal service. But if you're going to Humdrum, Montana, just no.
Absolutely not.
So, okay, there is another service to bring up, and that is Jump.
They had a booth at last year's PAX East. And,
Jump?
Yeah.
Jump is basically, for our audience, Jump is basically the streaming services we've talked about for PlayStation or Xbox, but for indie titles.
Yep.
Just straight up, that's what it is. So, I mean, if you're a big fan of indie titles, as I know I am, and Brian is, then this could be something that would be interesting to you.
Like
$5 a month, too, not bad.
That's... Yeah, and because again, I saw this. I was, talked to somebody at PAX East about this because they had a booth. The one thing that I still try to wrap my brain around is that it's a streaming service, but the one thing is that you still need to your system still needs to be capable of playing. It uses your local system hardware.
Yes.
So
it's closer to like the Satellaview with the Super Nintendo, where it downloaded the game, but you could only play it for a set amount of time.
Okay. That's okay. So, all right, that makes that analogy clears things up a bit because
it's streaming in that you don't own it and you have to get it from the internet, but it's not streaming in that it's not just piping the video to you, because that is the whole reason the GeForce Now I think is the only one we're talking about that is pure streaming, and that's why that's the reason it requires such a huge connection, because it's not pre-downloading it. It is literally piping you down the video and then taking your button presses, and nothing else. Nothing else is being done on your computer. Everything else is giving at least some, if not all, of the information to the system to play.
And yeah, for indie titles, that's great. And the things I remember this from the guy's spiel was that a certain percentage of the money that you give to Jump in the subscription cost goes back to the developers.
Yeah, 70%.
Which
70% of the proceeds go back to the developers.
Which, if I'm going to stream an indie game, that particular stat would be a selling point, because you go to PlayStation Now, Xbox Live, you pay like a $20 a month. How much of that's going back to the developers?
One thing I will say about people who support indie games is, while everybody likes a deal, for the most part, we're willing to spend money if we know it's going to the developers, rather than getting pocketed by the bigger companies.
Yes. So that was sort of like, oh, all right. So this is a nice little kickback here for the developers who have games on Jump. It's like, oh, okay. It's like I can't afford to buy the game outright, but I can at least give you something, which isn't bad. That's not bad at all. I actually like that.
We also have Project Steam.
Stream.
Project Stream.
Of course, Google's going to want to get in on a piece of this action.
Yes, it's on the internet.
Exactly.
That's all it takes for them to be interested in it.
But apparently, this is not really. This is sort of like a not really widely known to the public. I don't think it's a closed test.
Yeah, it still looks to be very early on with only one playable game being Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
Well, it's literally just them basically stress testing it, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a pretty strong game to stress test with.
That is a good candidate, no doubt.
And again, you need a significant internet speed for it.
25 is not too bad. I think standard around in this area is 30, so you can get standard internet and be able to play this, at least locally around where I live. But, you know, it also depends where you live. I live kind of in a medium-ish city, so...
Yeah. And, you know, it's entirely cloud-based. Your save data is stored in the cloud. So that is something to watch. And then, of course, we have Nintendo finally taking its baby steps into streaming with the Nintendo Switch Online service, which is for its NES games.
Well, for now.
Well, yeah.
We did find data for SNES, so it's coming.
It's coming. I mean, it just started, and you know, new games are being added to what, every week, every 2 weeks,
every month.
Every month.
Well, I don't know if they added anything in November.
They did. They add things in every month.
Okay.
I can pull up the list.
I know we just got a Zelda 2: The Adventure Link, and that's what I've been wasting my time on.
And Blaster Master, and then 2 more updated games. Because we were talking about it, I literally just tested my internet speed, and I'm getting 103 megabits per second.
Oh!
Cool!
That's not normal! I'm scared. Like, that's not right. That can't be right.
You can run everything!
Well, now you have me curious. Now I gotta test.
Okay, so now that I'm done doing that, yeah, I love Nintendo's setup and service, and I can't wait for more things to come.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of price, they've got everybody beat. It's $20 for the year. Like, you can't really beat that. It's $20 for the entire year, and you are getting NES games right now. And what I've noticed is that some of the games they've reprogrammed, they've reconfigured so that you can play online multiplayer with some of them.
Yeah, but Super Mario Bros. 3 online.
Like, that's hysterical.
That's something we needed in our
That
lives.
reminds me, Brian, we haven't played a single game together on our Switches yet.
No, this is a gross injustice.
We should do that at some point. So, Ice Climbers competitive?
Oh, yeah, right. Sure. Sure, I'll just get right on that.
Okay,
Really? You're gonna play NES games?
Yeah, Smash is a thing that exists, but no, we're gonna play Ninja Gaiden.
I mean, nothing wrong with that game.
As we discussed during the Smash podcast, I am a single player Smash guy.
Yes, you are. But it's just like, when I started seeing these games show up
I think I broke his mind.
What? You didn't break my mind. I just have nothing to add to that.
Okay. Single player Smash. What is that?
What is this? Because
I mean, you're talking to the guy who has spent almost like 80 hours just playing by himself in World of Light, so you're not really impressing me here.
Well, I completed my World Light by 100% at 35 hours.
Well, I did a New Game Plus, and yeah.
I haven't done the New Game Plus, that's why. I know why.
So
trust me, there's plenty more I could do if I wanted, but no, I'm fine with beating it once.
So...
But, yes, Ryan.
So it's like when I started seeing the games showing up on the Nintendo Switch Online, I'm like, what does this special designation mean? It's like, oh.
Wait a minute, Special Edition Dr. Mario? Oh, it just takes you to level 20 and you almost have to eat.
Yep, or Special Edition Legend of Zelda. You do what I do, and get every single item that you can before you go into a dungeon, before you go into the dungeon.
Well, Dungeon 1.
Yes. Well, it gives you every non-dungeon item, which is literally exactly what I do every time I play the game. I go into the first dungeon with the frickin' blue ring.
Yeah, I don't recall the last time I do that. I usually beat Dungeon 1 before I start roaming the world and grabbing all the stuff, typically. Because that usually gives me the money to go buy the candle, so I can burn the bushes to get all the 100 rupee spots.
Yeah, it's just how I play. I'd rather get all the stuff and then go into the dungeon.
Trust me, you are far, far from the only person that does that. I got friends who that you cannot convince them to play otherwise.
Here's the thing about the Nintendo system. I'm positive on it, but I understand and kind of feel at its base level the reason why people have issues with it, and it's because as a streaming service, it's great. For the cost for the multiplayer, it's great. But as a replacement for the Virtual Console, it is the Virtual Console had, at this same point in time, had like 10 times as many games as the Switch Online service does now. So for people who are interested in the old titles like that, it's disappointing.
Yes, I can see that. Because right now, I mean, the Nintendo Switch Online service hasn't been around for too long, so the variety is not there yet. But, you know, again, there is something to be said for having full ownership of your game. You know, that's you know, on a personal level, that's typically why I don't partake of the other streaming services. It's like,
here's the thing. At this point in time, I would argue, first of all, none of us really own our games. Even the physical copies are licenses. But I know what you mean, and I'm not going to be pedantic about that.
Thank you.
But on the other hand, it is absolutely true that every game right now when the servers go down, when these things are going away, like, we're going to lose the day one patches that make a lot of these games work. We're going to lose the portions of the game that can't fit on the disc that we have to download just to be able to play the game, and the game will never be played again. Like, right now, we are at a really weird moment of history because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But right now, the law is not backing us up because you do not legally have the right to hack your games to make them work if they cancel the online service that's giving you their information. So, like, if Nintendo shuts down its servers, I'm not going to be able to get that DLC for Zelda Breath of the Wild I paid for, or even the patches that have been put into it. So, pretty much everything is kind of in that bubble right now, because you can't even just go, I'm going to buy a physical release, and now I own that game, and in 20 years I'll be able to play it like we did with the NES, because that game literally doesn't have the entirety of it on the disc. Pretty much every AAA game, even if it's not a day one patch, has necessary files you have to download online because they couldn't fit it all on the disc.
And that gets into the subject of game preservation and...
which I've argued about on here enough.
Yes, you have, and I totally agree with you. It's just, you know, we need to have a mechanism to be able to preserve these games, and we don't, not legally.
We need to have. Well, I mean, ultimately, what we need to have is the government to literally put in an exception that allows us to make our games functional if support for them fails, and at least illegally allow us to fix it on our own, rather than having us have to literally break the law just to be able to mess with it.
You're asking for the government to do things.
You don't even need to pass a law through Congress. The Librarian of Congress gets to make exceptions every year to copyright. And they literally can make a blanket one for this. They've done it before. So, it's not actually far-fetched, but until they do, we're not even going to be able to really mess around on a larger scale with what we're going to do.
Right. That is the way of it. And, so now that streaming services are back in the realm of the industry, back in the discussion, as I said, personally, this is not something I would use, with the exception of the Nintendo Switch Online, because it's so dirt cheap.
Also, the fact that, the Nintendo Switch Online isn't trying to give us current-gen games that you could buy. Instead, it's just giving us a collection of games from yesteryear.
Yes.
Yep. Which, I feel like the Nintendo one is trying to be a very different thing than the other two.
Oh, and that's Nintendo in a nutshell.
Yeah, this is nothing new.
That is Nintendo in a nutshell. The only thing I have for that is that, we have the Nintendo Switch Online, and that's great and that's wonderful. Meanwhile, I sit here with my RetroPie and feel very smugly superior. So, that's just, that's, we get into the realm of emulation and all that fun stuff. So, I think as we're going to lead into the wind down here, I said this in the intro, and that was, I asked this, so while the idea of offering video games as a service certainly appeals to the developers and publishers, because for them it's an ongoing, permanent revenue stream, how does streaming services now affect the gaming landscape for us as players?
Well, I imagine a lot of ways it'll affect it the same way that Netflix did streaming video affected the rest of the movie and TV world. Like, it's going by... They want the ongoing revenue stream. But, ideally for us, if you're paying $20... Let's use the PlayStation. You're paying $20 a month, but you're playing games you would be spending $60 a month on. As long as they put enough new titles on there, that's a net positive. And let's be honest with ourselves, other than a couple favorites, most of us don't go back and replay that many old games.
Right. And I think that's part of the appeal of streaming games, is to be able to access the things that we otherwise wouldn't be willing to drop the cash on. And I think would be better suited for the more non-AAA titles that we're not going to be spending all of our time on. For example, say, I'm kind of going back to Nintendo for a hot second, mostly because it's what I've been playing recently. For Smash Brothers, yes, I'm going to have a physical copy of the game. But if I'm going to play something like Twinbee, which is not something I've, have really played that much and don't care to play that much, I'm not going to go try and hunt down a cartridge from eBay to try and play something. It's something that's quick, it's easy, and an hour or two, and then that's it. Never look at it again. Shooter. And you're going to get that with PlayStation Now. You're going to get that with Xbox Game Pass. Some things that you may just want, okay, give this a try for a day or two.
Well, especially I don't think anybody was going to...
Especially for people my age, I don't have as much time as I would like to play video games. I only have a few hours a day, as opposed to, back when I was a kid 20 years ago.
I mean, I think ultimately, assuming they pay people worthwhile, these streaming services could be excellent for indie developers, because there's a lot of AAA gamers that wouldn't go out and buy an indie title normally, but if they get it for free through PlayStation Now, maybe they'll give it a shot.
Right. But then you also have to make sure that these things get the recognition they deserve. And I think they're... Again, I wouldn't know this because I really haven't done a deep dive into something like PlayStation Now. But, would there be, like, curations or, people who are recommending this? Can I look at Brian's account and see what Brian's been playing and what he recommends? And if three people talking about streaming gaming, none of us are using any of the streaming systems other than Switch. But to my point is, if I to bring, indie titles into light, is I'm not really going to know or really bother to look unless I'm looking at someone else going, oh, that's what he's been playing. Let me have a look. Wonder what this is about. Wonder what that's about. Is this part of, a service's, hey, this is part of our featured list and it has these indie titles or indie title. Otherwise, I'm going to blow right past it in favor of, old PS2 or PS3 games. So, I think indie games can certainly benefit from the streaming service, but it has to still be advertised properly.
Well, I mean, like, for example, like, you already have this on Steam, for example, where you could go into any one of your friends' profiles and see what they've been playing. So something along those lines?
Of course. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
I can see that. I mean, as a way of trying to promote titles, as opposed to just going into PlayStation Now or Xbox Game Pass, just going in blind. I can see that. And, I mean, I know for me personally, I mean, the reason why I don't partake of these streaming services is that, well, for one, I don't have $20 a month to throw around. Not with how much I pay in student loans.
Yeah.
But also, for something like GeForce Now, I think I would have the internet. I mean, I probably do have the internet speeds to handle. I haven't done a speed test in a while, so I probably do. But at the same time, it's a resource drain. I mean, it's largely financial for me. It's not something I would seek out. And already it just I don't want to say that I'm old, but we've been playing video games for 30 years. We kind of know what we want in our consumption of video games.
Well, I suppose it's the difference between leasing a car and buying a car.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer to have. I mean, it is a personal preference. I prefer to have ownership.
Like, let's put it this way: if you were on a budget, I think that makes streaming better. Because
Yes.
if you go, I can spend $60 on a game today, or I could spend $20 over the next 3 months, play that game that I was going to spend $60 for this month, and then still be able to play other games the next 2 months, or play a bunch of. I mean, if it takes you quicker than a month to finish the game, then you have a bunch of games you can play over that same period of time.
Yeah.
Well, then that boils down to the next question of how much free time do you actually have to play video games?
Yes.
If you don't have that much free time, if you only have a couple of hours a month for gaming, then paying for a streaming subscription service is a waste of your time.
And money.
And ownership is the better way to go about something, because then it's, I'm able to put, 10 hours of it this month. Maybe I could get 30 hours next month, but then I'm not going to be able to do anything for the next 2 months after that.
In theory, you would have to only be complete one game every 3 months for you to break even buying the game. And I'm not saying that's not true, and some people will just pick up one game and they'll play that game forever. But I think for a lot of people, one game every 3 months is reasonable, and I think a lot of people probably complete more than one game every 3 months.
Yeah, I mean that definitely could, in theory, that could work, I suppose.
Now,
guys, I'm being the devil's advocate here because I don't even buy indie titles digitally. I have a thing full of limited run games because I want to own these things physically. So I'm not the person who's going to be doing this stuff, but I'm trying to put forth the argument here because I understand why people.
It is for somebody like myself who have, work all day and then, come home and then I have my other job to deal with. I say to deal with, it's my photography career. It's not something that I just be like, that.
So this is your third job then?
Maybe. The idea of a streaming service for me would be a waste of money because, going back to Nick's point, I just don't have the time, and so eventually I would feel like I was throwing $20 a month away.
Right, and then the next part, at least with streaming services, is, there are some things like PlayStation Now that have, 700 freaking titles, but not every service is going to have that. They're going to have a rotating library. What if I come across a title that I want to keep playing but gets rotated out? I want to also have a method to be able to get this game to be able to play it whenever I want. And would I be able to then get a digital or physical copy at a lower price? That would be another big topic that would generate my interest. I don't know about anyone else, but having a PlayStation service, I say there's a PlayStation 4 game that I really like, but it's going to be cycled out soon. Would I be able to make a digital purchase at a discount?
The answer would be no.
See, and then it boils back to then it might just be better for me to just have the physical copy of the game.
Yes, but here's the argument here. I mean, there's several arguments here, but if it's a game you would never have played without the streaming service, then you would never have known to go and buy the game to begin with.
Right. And and again, it's a delicate balance, and I guess my ultimate point here is that it depends upon your own personal gaming scenario. But for some people, streaming would not make sense to them in the slightest. For some other people, it makes all the sense in the world to use that and really don't go and buy many games. Instead, just have a subscription service, a la GameFly, or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Also, I mean, I just have, just because of my own personality, I do have a slight bit of contempt for the AAA devs that are putting their games out for streaming and going, I see what you're doing. I see.
Brian, that's just you being angry and bitter in general.
I was going to say, I don't actually see what they're doing, Brian. Well, no, I'm serious here. For most of these AAA titles, nobody's ever going to play them again. $60 up front gives them more than $20 split among whatever games that person plays that month. This benefits Microsoft and Sony and whoever else is doing the ones, but for the individual game developer, I would be surprised if they aren't making less per game through streaming than they are selling them individually.
I have a concern where if the subscription model becomes more successful than regular distribution of a game, that it reaches a point where the game is only available via subscription.
Well, we've already talked about that a couple times. All 4 of the BS Zelda games are exclusive. Or 3 of the 4 are exclusive. One was Link to the Past.
I mean, my concern is that I'm a little wary of games going entirely to a subscription model. Think of Adobe, which makes Photoshop and Illustrator and whatnot.
Well, what you're talking about is the MMO model.
Yes.
Which would be a problem if they started doing it per game. But the only place we've seen per game out of everything we've talked about so far was Capcom with Resident Evil 7. And that was a trial. We don't even know that if they're going to continue, if it's going to be per game, or if it's going to be like a system, and that was just the first test. Because that was literally not a normal thing. That whole thing in Japan was a test.
Right.
So, like, if it went to per game, oh yeah, I could definitely see your issues. But as long as we're talking about libraries like this, I mean, I don't know what their contracts look like, but I can assume that it works similarly to the way Amazon pays its authors, which would be, it's going to take however many hours you play in each of those games per month that you played, and then go, okay, this is our cut, so let's say we take 50%. And they'll split that other 50% among all the other games you played that month based off how much you played each of those games hour-wise. So most of these companies are going to get way less than they would be getting with the physical copy when you're doing it through the subscription model.
Times however many number of people who also have a streaming subscription, so.
Well, they're not going to get any money from people who are paying for it, who aren't playing your game.
Mm.
And unless you're taking 3 months to beat that game, they're not getting their $60 isn't going towards them. If you play any other game during that period of time, it's getting split with them, and that's not counting the cut that goes to the provider that's putting this out.
Right.
Now, physical copies also aren't going to be straight up because you have to pay for the distribution, you have to pay for the copies. Like, there's costs on either side, but I would be incredibly surprised if they make more money streaming than they do physically. Just nothing matches up to support that.
Yeah, I mean, not at this time, because again, you need not only the hardware to support that, you need the internet connection to be able to handle that. So, my concern about video games becoming a subscription-only model, right now, that is something that would take a long time to get to if it happens at all.
And the argument of, well, what if they take it off of the subscription service and I can't play it anymore? Okay, well, that is a valid concern, but it is exactly the same concern as I bought this physical game and they stopped supporting it, and now I can't get the download that I need to be able to play the game, which we are going to deal with.
And very soon. So how do streaming services affect the gaming landscape for players? I mean, well, there's a variety of effects, which we have gone through in great detail. It basically comes down to your own play styles and your own financial ability and what hardware you have. It's like, are you even able to do so at this point? Because while the idea of streaming services themselves are not new, as we have clearly demonstrated, the next incarnation of streaming services is relatively new. And
I'm kind of surprised that the current generation streaming services now.
Supreme and screaming services.
Yes. that the streaming services now haven't been more embraced. And I think a lot of that comes from people having a wall of video games they'll never play as a status symbol. To go, look, I am a gamer. Here are my games.
No, some people just like it as a as a collector and as a hobbyist, even if they don't play them.
Like someone who has Legend of Dragoon sitting on their shelf for many, many years and hasn't touched.
I'm not denying that. I'm just saying, I think that I can talk about myself. No. No, I don't have them all viewed on my wall, Brian. How I keep my games. I have a chest.
You do. You do have a chest.
But I think that part of it is both feeling like I have this wall of games, I am a gamer, is part of who I am, and I recognize that. And like being able to show that off to other people. Look, this is how many games I have, these are the things I have. When honestly, for a lot of people, and I include probably all three of us in this, and all three of us have different reasons for wanting to own the physical games, but I think there are games that all three of us know we're never going to play again that we've already played. And we would have spent less money if we just had a streaming service. Honestly, we would spend less money if we had a streaming service and then just bought the 1 or 2 games a year that we go, I loved this, I want to own this. It still would probably cost us less money. But all three of us have different reasons for wanting physical copies. And I definitely won't move away from physical copies. I don't even like digital copies. It took me forever to embrace Steam, and even then I use that far less than I use my Switch. But I still recognize that I definitely would save money if I just went to a streaming service.
Fair enough. So, Nick, you have anything else you would like to add before I call this?
I think he wrapped that up nicely.
All right. So, if any of you out there on the wide world of the internet have any questions, comments, thoughts on this episode or any other episode of Downloadable Content, you can let us know. dlcpodcast.com. Click the feedback button or get a hold of us on Facebook at Downloadable Content or Twitter at DL Content. Every single episode can be found on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and our website, dlcpodcast.com. Have a look at upcoming episodes. Let us know if you want to be in on an episode. Give us ideas for future episodes. We're always willing. We don't bite. We like feedback. So, all there on the website, on the internet. Many different ways to get downloadable content into your ears. So, all it remains for me to do is to thank Nick and Ronnie for being on this episode with me. So, on that happy note, I'm Brian. Have a good one, everybody.